Welcome to the first episode of ECTEL Bytes for 2023. The show is a production of the Eastern Caribbean Telecommunications Authority, and I'm your host, Coretta Crooks-Charles, ECTEL's Communications and Media Relations Manager. By now, you should know that ECTEL is the regional regulatory body advising the National Telecommunications Regulatory Commissions, or the NTRCs, on electronic communications or telecommunication matters in our 5 member states, namely the Commonwealth of Dominica, Grenada, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The goal of ECTEL Bytes is to provide you, our viewers, with bite-sized information about developments in electronic communications being undertaken by the Directorate as well as like-minded organizations. So today we're going to explore how, if at all, does the electronic communications sector impact the economics of our ECTEL member states. Our very special guest is Mrs. Ferdil Felix Polius, ECTEL's Acting Director of Economics and Finance. Welcome to ECTEL Bytes. Ferdil, is it okay if I call you Ferdil?
Yes, it is.
Welcome to ECTEL Bytes.
Thank you, Coretta.
So since as it's your first time on the show, tell us a bit about the Economics and Finance Department, or ENF for short. How many staff do you have, and what are some of the department's functions?
Okay, thank you, Coretta. So, as you rightly said, the Economics and Finance Department, the ENF, as we say within ECTEL, is one of 3 regulatory departments within ECTEL. We have the Legal Affairs Department, the Technical Services Department. The ENF is made up of 4 members of staff. We have the Director of Economics and Finance, you have the Regulatory Analyst, a Research Analyst, and the Research Assistant. So for our main function is that of economic regulation. And that, there are 2 main functions under that umbrella. One, it basically entails setting the rules for pricing and tariffs of electronic communications within our member states. And the second includes competition analysis. This is basically to assess or to determine whether the market is competitive, whether the service provider's pricing is competitive, whether any service provider has significant market power. But apart from economic regulation, ENF is also charged with the responsibility for industry analysis. And by that I mean we are responsible for conducting surveys and studies on the sector. We are also responsible for conducting financial evaluations of all license applications coming to ECTEL, as well as we have the responsibility for the management of ECTEL's investment portfolio. So
that's quite a bit.
Yes,
okay.
It is.
Okay, so you mentioned that ENF department is responsible for analysis, conducting surveys on the sector. And I know that one of the major surveys is the annual electronic communications sector review. Tell us about the process for completion of the review, including the data collection process. Who collects the data, over what period is it collected, and how is it collected?
Okay, so as you rightly said, the report is prepared on an annual basis. And the process for completion of the report is basically twofold. So you have the data collection process. And this is where we basically issue a call to the service providers for the ICT data for any financial period. The financial period is it starts in April and ends in March. So we issued a call to the service providers through our NTRCs. Once the data is received from the service providers, we go through the process of validating that data. And once the data has been validated, we prepare the report. We prepare and publish the report. Okay. So in terms of the process for the data collection, so since the liberalization of the sector in the early 2000s, we had employed a very manual process for data collection. So we would issue the data collection in an Excel form to the service providers. Once we receive the data, we would enter that data into our own Excel database. But in 2019, we went through the process of developing a portal for an electronic platform for collection of the data. So starting in the 2020-2021 period, we actually commissioned the portal, and so far we've collected data for 1 year using the portal.
Okay, so we'll invite you back on the show to speak
Yes.
about that data portal and who can access it and what types of information will be available. So you'll be back on the show for that. So who are some of the main users of this data being collected?
So far, the main users are primarily government agencies, policymakers, investors, persons in academia. You also have international organizations, for example, the International Telecommunications Union, the World Trade Organization. You have our development partners, for example, the World Bank. And you also have our regional institutions, for example, the Caribbean Telecommunications Union, the CTU. In addition to that, we do receive requests for data from other service providers, and other regulators as well.
Okay, so in your estimation, how can policymakers and other stakeholders use this data to positively impact consumers?
So from an ECTEL perspective, we use the data collected to conduct market analysis, and that is usually done to inform regulatory and policy interventions. We also use the data to measure regulatory progress, for example, whether or not service providers are meeting their license obligations. At the national level, policymakers can use the data to monitor ICT development, for example, to determine how the use and access to ICT services. They can also use it to benchmark, see how well they are doing against other countries. And I know this is an example from St. Lucia, where we do receive requests from Invest St. Lucia for onward submission to investors. So there is a use for the data to be used by investors when they are thinking of commencing business in any of our member states.
Okay, and I'm wondering, I've looked at it, but I've not gone in detail.
Mm-hmm.
Would the data be so thorough that it would say what communities in a particular member state is being underserved as it relates to ICT, or we don't go that deep?
We don't necessarily go that in-depth when we do our analysis, but based on our knowledge and our communications with the NTRCs and the service providers, we would have a fairly good knowledge of which are the underserved communities within the member states.
Okay, and that's where the Universal Service Fund comes in play, because they provide the relevant, electronic communication services. Okay, thanks, Ferdil. One of the key findings of the latest review of the electronic communication sector across ECTEL member states is a 20% reduction in sector investment from $146 million to $117 million, and a slight increase in employment. What would you say was the main cause of the reduction in investment?
Okay, so the data suggests that the investment, the contraction in the investment was a result of a drop in spending on the mobile networks in 2020-21. I should just mention that it is not uncommon for us to witness drops in investment. As a matter of fact, investment spending tends to fluctuate year on year. And you typically see a bump or a hike in investment when service providers are making efforts to keep pace with technology, successive technology. For example, when 3G was introduced, you would have observed an increase in investment, similarly for 4G LTE. So it's not uncommon for us to witness fluctuation in investment. And even when, another example I could think of is in the Commonwealth of Dominica, after Hurricane Maria, there was a huge spike in investment in that member state in the following year as service providers commenced the network build out post the hurricane.
Okay, all right. What has been the percentage of investment in relation to GDP, gross domestic product, and also the percentage of investment in relation to revenue?
So for the past 5 years, service providers have invested at least approximately $138 million in their networks, and that represents roughly 1% of GDP. However, it's as a percentage of revenue, it's approximately 20%, and that has remained relatively stable over the 5-year period.
Okay, impressive.
Yeah.
What has been the trend in capital spending for the various categories of electronic communications networks and services, and what are the categories of investment?
Okay, so you have the five major categories. So you have spending on the mobile networks, spending on the fixed network, spending on your submarine cable system, spending on your subscriber network, and spending on your internet networks. So what we've observed over the past 3 years, there has so the spending on the mobile network accounts for approximately 50% of all spending. It has accounted for approximately 50% of all spending. And spending on the internet networks has accounted for approximately 30% of total spending.
Okay. All right, so you just explained the categories. Is it widely accepted that broadband internet is a key pillar for digital development and in economic growth? Can you tell us what has been the major trend in mobile broadband penetration in the past 3 to 5 years? And are there any concerns regarding these trends?
So we have seen an increase in the mobile broadband penetration from 2017 to 2021. So in 2017, the mobile penetration rate was approximately 57%, and that has moved to approximately 70% in 2021. However, we do believe that there is room for improvement because, as you rightly said, broadband is key. It's a key pillar for economic development. And what we have noticed, despite the fact that mobile penetration is almost 100%, we are still concerned that the rate for mobile broadband penetration is still relatively low compared to overall mobile penetration.
Okay. All right. So the price of broadband service is a concern to policymakers and regulators, and dare I add, consumer. What have you noticed about the trend in fixed and mobile broadband pricing in the report?
Okay, so you are correct. So it goes back to the question that you just asked about the mobile broadband penetration, and one of the reasons we are suspecting that the mobile broadband penetration may be relatively low. It may be attributed to the affordability of that service. So the International Telecommunications Union, they've established a benchmark for determining the affordability of the basic broadband package. So for a basic broadband package to be considered affordable, the ITU has indicated that it needs to cost at a rate that is equal to 2% of monthly GNI, which is gross national income per capita. So in our own analysis, what we have found is that the basic packages in the member states are priced way above the ITU benchmark. The only member state that has packages or a package that is close to the ITU benchmark is St. Kitts and Nevis. And even then, it is slightly above the 2% threshold. It's on average 2.5% of monthly GNI per capita.
Okay, so we need to move to St. Kitts. I'm just joking. How do you think that the observed trend affects broadband uptake by the consumers?
Well, I think it does impact because it's really about, sometimes it boils down to choice. If you have a choice between having a mobile broadband package and maybe having to meet your other basic needs, what would you prioritize? So we do believe that it has an impact on the uptake of the service.
Okay, all right. When one thinks of economic growth, you'll probably think of agriculture, tourism, manufacturing, and probably you've never thought of the electronic communications sector. But how important is it, though, that this sector is into contributing to economic growth in our member states?
Okay, so mobile broadband is fundamental to everything that we do. So even with the sectors that you have mentioned, broadband is actually a facilitator. So you can't have tourism, you can't have even agriculture, education if you don't have a proper mobile broadband system. But in terms of the direct contribution of the sector to GDP, so we have noted that for the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, that on average, the contribution of these member states, they have an close to 6% contribution to GDP. But the contribution varies within the ECTEL member states. So it ranges from between 4%, or approximately 4%, and 6% in some of the member states.
Okay, all right. So when will the next sector review be ready for public consumption?
So we are currently in the data collection phase. So we have been receiving entries from service providers in our new portal. We expect that we will have the report ready for publication by the end of March.
Okay. And for persons who may not have noticed that we do these annual sector reports, you could go to our website, www.ectel.int, click on the communications tab, and then you'll see a bunch of annual sector reviews where you could, get more information to figure out, the importance of the sector to our economy. Any closing remarks, Ferdil?
Yes, I'd just like to thank you, Curator, for the opportunity for us to showcase the work of the E&F department, particularly the work that we do on the annual sector review. And as you just mentioned, for persons viewing who may have a greater interest in the data and in the report, the data from early 2000 when we liberalized the market is available on the website. The reports are also available on the website.
Okay.
So I do encourage persons who may have a greater interest to go to the website for further information.
Okay, thank you so much. And it's important too, because before this interview, I was having a conversation with someone, and it's important because you may not know what happened in the past and the growth and improvements being made now, because everything seems so ridiculously expensive. But if you were to look back 20 years ago, the benefits that customers are experiencing were not heard of. So thank you so much, Ferdil, for being our guest on ECTEL Bytes, our very first show for 2023. And in case you joined us late, the recording will be on our Twitter and YouTube channels as well, so you could check us out there. And if you have any questions, just leave them in the comment section below, and Ferdil and I will go through and we'll be sure to respond to you. So thanks for joining us, and look out for us again in February. We're typically live on the 4th Wednesday of each month, but I believe February 22nd is a holiday, so we might come on the day before or the day after, but I'll definitely put out a flyer to inform you of our next show. So I'm your host, Coretta Crooks-Charles, ECTEL's Communications and Media Relations Manager. Thank you again for joining us, and do keep safe until next time.
Thank you.